Introducing Sarah Bernhardt, Artist and Muse by Dr. Terryl Lawrence.
Boy, she had quite a life. As the 20th century dawned, her fans were sending each other colored postcards of her, which was very unusual at that time. And she was an actress who was larger than life. life and she has myths about her that people even talk about today. Let me see if I can I diminish this? How's that? Sorry, everybody can still see, right? Okay, her menagerie, she had wild animals, not too many, not like Michael Jackson, but she had many dogs, many other creatures. And and it was rumored that she slept in a coffin, but she only did that for publicity, and I'll show that to you. And she performed the role of Hamlet wearing a wooden leg because she had neglected an injury on her knee, and at the end of her life she had to have her leg amputated, but the wooden leg was so uncomfortable that she had a chair designed like a maharaja, and she was carried around in this wonderful chair. Sarah was born in Paris. Her mother, let me I guess she was born in Paris. Wasn't she beautiful? This is Sarah at about 14 years old. She had strawberry blonde hair, green blue eyes, and her mother was a courtesan, which is a nice word for um, a prostitute. But she enjoyed liaisons. She was very high priced with influential French aristocrats. And through her mother's connection, Sarah attended a conservatory, which was a prestigious and elitist acting school, which enabled her to join the company ultimately, not right away, of the Comédie Française. And it was the most revered theater in France. Sarah was said to be extremely flamboyant, and as we go through this, you will see how flamboyant she was, and she was promiscuous. She had a child out of wedlock. She was about 18, 19 years old before she married many years later a very mediocre actor, which is another story about why can't I advance? I'll have to advance this way. Here she is. At least you can see her coloring here. She had very curly hair. Her eyes changed depending on what she was wearing. And she married this mediocre fellow who she made into an actor named Jacques Damola. Here he is. And he was a man who was not only awful and mean to her, but he was heavily addicted to morphine. And these facts were not enough. There's more. Her mother was Jewish, and so she always recognized that she had Jewish roots. And that was a problematic fact during those anti Semitic times living in France. And in this poster by the great Alphonse Mucha, of the heroine of Edmond Rostand's La Samaritaine, Sarah turned her Semitic exoticism into an alluring attribute. In this poster, if we look at it, you will see there are some Hebrew letters behind her head. Jawa appears behind the head, while Shaddai, which is another, you can't really read it from here, another Hebrew word for God, accompanies this very small figure at the bottom of the poster. She became one of the muses for Mucha, and I'll show you some of the beautiful posters and explain to you how he made them. And Sarah used photography on an unprecedented scale. She realized that if she had multiple posters, multiple photographs, it would spread her reputation worldwide. Between 1858 and 1863, the great photographer Felix Nader became internationally famous. He loved to go ballooning, as you can see here. He was famous because he photographed a lot of the celebrities at that time. And anybody who stopped by his studio in Paris would have their portrait taken by this world famous celebrity photographer. Sarah was about 16 years old. She might have been 17 when she posed for him. And she had barely begun her very long and successful career at that time. And so he was always out ballooning. He loved it. It was a new sport. And he willingly left all of his assistants, because he had many, to do most of the portrait work. But Sarah was able to entice him to make these lovely images of her. And you can see she had all that wonderful hair. In this is probably the most famous portrait that he did of her. He wrapped her in a great sweep of velvet, and one shoulder was bared, but her slender body, and she was extremely thin, was concealed here. He took numerous photographs of Sarah. He even constructed elaborate storyboards of her performances in both Joan of Arc and in 1894, and as Theodora, who was a fortune teller. And so he obviously put her in different cloths that he used in his studio. Here she is as Joan of Arc on the left and Theodora on the right. And she was famous for her elaborate jewel encrusted costumes. Now, a storyboard is what when you're making a film or a video, a lot of animators, a lot of artists make storyboards so you know how the story will flow. And Nader did that for her in photographs. And he took numerous photographs of her, as you can see. And one thing she certainly did was learn how to emote. She was theatrical in her private settings, and she was also very, very on stage. Her home was an amalgam of unique and exotic pieces that spoke to her personality. And I'll show you her home in a minute. And so all of these throughout her career, till she was about 25, 30, Nader took pictures of her. And we have a tremendous archive of photographs of Sarah. And as you notice, her costumes were beautiful. Here are some more. And Joan of Arc again. Okay, so this is her library. She was quite a leader and a reader. And look at all these books. She loved to read. She was an extremely bright, educated woman. If you look here on the edge of the bookcase, you will see these beautiful sculptures. A lot of people did not know that during her lifetime, she loved to sculpt. It helped her to relax, and she had some marvelous teachers as well. Here she is again in another picture. She's sitting in her living room. She had these giant pillows. And in this portrait, in this double-sized living room with all the things that make her more exotic, she is carving a sculpture. And her greyhound always with her. He was her favorite dog. And so she worked all the time on sculpture when she wasn't studying for the theater. Here she is again, some years later, again relaxing in her room. Okay, this was her bedroom, and she really did not sleep in a coffin. I can't believe it. But she did make love in the coffin, and she also posed for a photograph for more publicity, sleeping here. Okay, Her defining feature was her thinness. It was often said, and these are ridiculous, but I'll tell you because it's been written about her, that she was so thin that when she swallowed a pill, she looked pregnant. And when she took a bath, the level of the water would go down. She was not that thin. No, nobody is. But we have to remember that the age, the Victorian age that she lived in, women were very much more voluptuous than they are today. And she had curly red hair, and you can see that it wrapped around her head, very curly hair. And she had eyes that changed from gray to blue to green. Her forehead was very high, although it's covered with bangs here. And she had an air of mystery about her. She dressed beautifully. She took great pains to always look like she just stepped out of a movie. And her diction was exquisite. Her voice in the newspapers by critics was likened to gold. And she was about 5'2", 5'3" tall. So she was very delicate and extremely beautiful, wonderful complexion. Sarah was thoroughly unconventional. And even though she patronized the leading fashion designers of her time, she dictated her own style, which was completely original. She knew what she wanted. She would pick out the fabrics and she would tell the designers exactly what she wanted. And she wanted to have elegant lines on her clothing that followed the svelte contours of her body. Her mother paid little attention to her. She really wasn't interested in Sarah. The mother had two more daughters out of wedlock, and Sarah's strongest attachment and one of the great loves of her life was her youngest sister, who died very young. Her name was Regine. And so I told you that she got pregnant at a young age, and I'll tell you who the father was soon. But her son's name was Maurice Bernhardt, and he was born on December 22nd, 1864. And according to Sarah, you can see very handsome young man, beautiful build. She said, and she had had a very romantic affair with a young, handsome Belgian prince. His name was Henri de Ligne of Belgium. And she mentioned in her memoirs that he was the love of her life. And let's go back. You can see that the Maurice has these wonderfully chiseled features the same way as the prince. And so what Sarah did was she wrote to Linya and she appealed for assistance with, quotes, their child. And he wrote back, although he knew a woman named Bernhardt, he knew nothing of the child. However, he did enclose a 50-pound note in his correspondence, and it's no secret, certainly not, that Sarah had many, many gentlemen friends, and I'd be here all night if I told you how many there were and who they were. And to support herself after the birth of Maurice, she decided to become an actress. She had been trained as a young girl. She went to school for acting, and she was able at this point to play minor roles and understudies at the Porte Saint Martin, which was a popular melodramatic theater. In early 1866, she was able to attain a reading with Felix Nader, who was director of the theater, the Olean Theater, which is a popular theater on the left bank of Paris. And here are some of the costumes that she wore. This headdress was made by Lalique. She also was a muse of Lalique's as well, Rene Lalique. Duskynel described the reading at this theater, the Odeon Theater of Europe. He described the reading later, saying that he had before him a creature who was marvelously gifted, intelligent to the point of genius. She had enormous energy under the appearance of a frail and delicate body, and she had a savage will. He got all of that from her reading. At 25 years old, Sarah became a favorite of a group. She had groupies, a group of theater goers in Paris called the Sarah d'Auteurs, and they would come to her performances. They would yell themselves hoarse for her, and her energy and her presence was a breath of fresh air for these young people who were used to overblown, camphor-filled kind of acting. And so she had her first big success in a play called Le Passant, which means the passerby. And you can see how slim she was in this photograph. And this was the first role that she wore trousers in. And the play was so very successful that there was a command performance from Emperor Napoleon III and for his empress, and he was living at the Tuileries Palace at that time. It no longer exists, just the gardens are there. Many of Sarah's love affairs were with famous men, including Napoleon III, here we have him, and Edward, the Prince of Wales. This is not Charles. This is Edward, many years before, the Prince of Wales. And her memoirs include tales of her experience during the war. The story was that she was having a rest cure in the south of France in July of 1870, when the Emperor Napoleon III involved France in the Franco-Prussian War. Frantic to get back to Paris, Sarah soon became aware of the multitude of wounded soldiers that were being brought back to Paris. Something had to be done for them. Here she is, ready to help out. And you can see very, very lovely looking young lady. She attained permission, and she had a lot of power because she was a very popular actress at that time. So she got permission to open the Odeon Theater as a military hospital. She arranged through everyone that she possibly could ask for provisions to be delivered. And she called on her friends and her acquaintances to come and nurse the wounded, read to them, write letters home, and change bandages. And the theater quickly overflowed with casualties. And Sarah herself tended to many of the 5,600 injured. She slept in the theater. She was there all the time. She cheerfully autographed photographs for the men, and she tirelessly, to the point of exhaustion, helped with their care. She was always a patriot. This was very important. She was a citizen of France, and she loved it. And when she knew that something had to be done, if she couldn't get any help, Sarah was perfectly willing to do it herself. Her love affairs were numerous. I love this. Samuel Poutsey, do you know this painting? It's in the Metropolitan Museum. Samuel Poutsey was a brilliant young man. He was also a gynecological surgeon. In fact, he's the one who's responsible for those internal exams that women suffer through. So you may not like him, but I found it was particularly fascinating to me that she had a 10-year relationship, a real love affair with Dr. Samuel Poutsey. And his image is captured here in this stunning portrait. It's quite large, by John Singer Sargent. Dr. Poutsey, his other name was Dr. God, was a brilliant gynecological surgeon in Paris. And after their 10-year torrid love affair ebbed, they remained close friends, confidants. They wrote extremely lengthy correspondence until he passed away in 1918. And this is the same Dr. Poutsey who was linked to a clandestine affair with Amélie Gautreau. Do you recognize this painting by Sargent also? This stunning and mysterious woman who Sargent immortalized in the painting called Madame X. She was so humiliated by this painting that she wore veils to go out for years. And another thing that I should tell you, Sargent acted as the cover-up for the affair of Dr. Poutsey and Madame X, or Amélie Gautreau. She was married to a very wealthy man, but she was having this affair with Dr. Poutsey. In Paris, around 4 o'clock in the afternoon was the time for affairs. Women would arrange to meet their lovers, and a lot of the gowns that women wore at that time had those little covered buttons that run all the way down the back of the dress. And because if they were not done perfectly and they got home, their husbands might notice that they had been in and out of their dresses. And so fortunately for them, the zipper was invented at that time, and it made things a lot easier. So Sarah's, okay, so now you know about them. This is Victor Hugo. And Sarah's greatest theatrical triumph thus far was in a play called Ruy Blas, performed at the Odeon Theater and written by the illustrious Victor Hugo, the great poet. And the drama is a tragedy in which Sarah, as you can see her in costume here on the right, played a queen. Ruy Blas was an indentured servant, and he played a practical joke with a group of other men on the queen, and then he dared to fall in love with her. And no role was better suited than for Sarah Bernhardt. Her enchanting voice, her delivery of Victor Hugo's exquisite poetry captivated both the writer and the audience. Victor Hugo just adored her. And overnight, Sarah had achieved her ambition, and she was acclaimed as the most important actress in Paris. And at last, the prestigious Comédie Française could no longer ignore her, and the Odeon Theater, where she had been performing all of her work until that time, was now too small a venue to hold her talent, and she joined the Comédie Française, which was much more prestigious. As the most interesting actress in Paris, her name became a boon to the box office. She knew how to charm the audience, and she thrived on being the center of attention. And I'll show you some photographs here of her in costume. The center one is, oh, I love this. And if you do, I believe it's on the 17th, there is at the Palm Beach Convention Center, there is a wonderful antique show, and very often they have copies in different colors of this glorious poster of Sarah. They're life size. I'll talk more about it in a minute, but they are so beautiful. And so she was the most interesting actress in Paris, and people would come from all over to see her. Let's look at some of the poses, and notice she's so dramatic. She takes poses that really are almost Baroque. Here are some of her costumes. She wore different wigs, of course, but always elaborate. The crown she's wearing on the left was made by Lalique. Okay, and so her most esteemed role was of Phaedra, a role that she continued to refine. And what I should tell you is that she performed Camille, she performed Phaedra, she performed Joan of Arc, and every time she performed it throughout her career, she would change it a little bit, add things, embroider it with new sentences. She was really very creative. And so audiences came to the theater just to see Sarah perform. And if she was not going to be on the stage, box office receipts would slip very badly. Now, let me just explain Phaedra to you. And many of you probably know the mythological tale. Phaedra was the daughter of the king of Crete, King Minos. King Minos had a story of the Minotaurs involved with him. And his wife was Queen Pasiphae of Crete. Phaedra married Theseus, who killed the Minotaur. He was the king of Athens at this point and the slayer of the Minotaur. And Theseus had a son. His name was Hippolytus. And he had previously been married to an Amazon queen before he married Phaedra. And they went to visit his son, he and Phaedra, and I took some pictures out of mythology books. Here's Hippolytus and Phaedra. He wants nothing to do with her, but she fell madly in love with him. And he was really repulsed by the thought that this is my father's wife. This is awful. So he rejected her. Phaedra killed herself, and she left a note, very duplicitous note, saying that Hippolytus had raped her. Not true at all. When Theseus found the note, when her husband, the king of Athens, found her note, he asked the god of the sea, Poseidon, to take revenge on his son because he believed it. How could his wife lie? One day, as Hippolytus was driving his chariot by the seashore near the water, Poseidon sent a sea monster to frighten Hippolytus' horses. The horses bolted. They tangled Hippolytus in the reins and they killed him. And so she probably had the best time playing Phaedra, all this drama, all this excitement, murder, blood. Sarah had a very extravagant aesthetic that encompassed the late 19th century obsession with death and sexuality. And so that's why she slept in a coffin, and that's why she probably loved doing Phaedra. Not only did she consistently die for love on stage, she surrounded and adorned herself with all kinds of macabre objects. And it said that she cherished the human skull that was presented to her by Victor Hugo. It was inscribed by this original verse by Hugo. And inside the skull, or maybe on the top of it, he wrote, "Skeleton, what have you done with your soul? Lamp, what have you done with your flame? Empty cage, what have you done with the beautiful bird that used to sing? Volcano, what have you done with your lava? And slave, what have you done with your master?" And she cherished this skull. Here she is playing Hamlet and holding it all of her life. It can be said that Sarah Bernhardt was larger than life. Not only was her acting totally different from other performances, she emoted to the nth degree, but she had excellent personal taste. She was utterly flamboyant, but everything was in good taste. Many of her costumes were lavishly designed and bejeweled, and some of Paris's greatest designers, including Lalique, Rene Lalique, Alphonse Mucha, Toulouse-Lautrec, and George Fouquet, took her as their muse. This astonishing snake bracelet, you can see it goes around the arm, probably rests on the top of the hand and has this ring that goes on her finger. It's one of the most, it's by Georges Fouquet, and it's one of the most beautiful Art Deco pieces ever created. It recalls Cleopatra's self-inflicted death by the deadly Egyptian asp. The Egyptian asp is the asp or cobra that kills you faster than any other. You have only within an hour to get the antidote, where with other cobras, you have 24 hours. So it's really not a pleasant experience. And so the asp was inspired by Sarah's slim and sensually carved body, as we can see in this portrait that was painted of her by Dudley Hardy in 1889. And there were many portraits. You can imagine she was on everybody's tongue. The posters of her, photographs all over Paris. And so this is only one of the many, many portraits that were done of Sarah. You can see how slim she was. And interestingly, her involvement in the visual arts was really not with traditional portraits like painting, but with advertising. She recognized that the best way to publicize her talent was in the reign of the realm of mass production. She embraced technology of the new medium. Photography, this is 1889. Photography had been invented in England, but the way we know it with positive and negatives in 1839. So by the time Sarah was performing in the 1880s, 1890s, photography was fast, it was more accurate, it was sharper. And so she recognized that photographs, posters were the way to go to advertise herself. And she embraced new technology and media as well. So it's not surprising that she had her voice recorded by Thomas Alva Edison. And she was the first actress, the first major actress to appear in motion pictures. In Paris, at the end of the 19th century, there was an explosion of new technology, including the Eiffel Tower, which was originally supposed to be a radio tower. And there was the internal combustion vehicles, electric lighting had been invented, airplanes, bicycles, voice recordings, motion pictures, and a variety of new manufacturing and creative productive processes. But nothing exemplified the emerging age of commerce and technology better than the Eiffel Tower. And it still stands in power as a majestic landmark. It was erected in Paris in 1889, and no city had a better claim to its glamour than Paris at that time. We had Chanel, Poiret, Doucet, all these designers, all the art, Picasso, all these people coming to Paris and making it the Mecca for fine art and fashion. And so the style of Art Nouveau reigned supreme in Paris during the late 19th century. And I know I'm talking to a group of Art Deco, but you wouldn't have had Art Deco without Art Nouveau. And to me, the Eiffel Tower with its wonderfully geometric forms is kind of a bridge between Art Nouveau, which is the line of beauty and curly lines, to the geometric forms of Art Deco. And so there were wonderful collaborations between the Czech artist Alphonse Mucha and Sarah Bernhardt. And Mucha worked at producing, well, he produced a magazine, he put the whole thing together, and he did advertising illustrations, and he also was a magnificent painter. He didn't just do posters, he did extraordinary paintings that are in Czechoslovakia. Just about Christmas time in the year of 1894, Mucha entered a print shop to have some things made, and he noticed that the printer was just about having a nervous breakdown because he had to create a poster for Sarah Bernhardt's new play, and he just didn't have time before Christmas. And so Mucha volunteered to design the lithograph. A lithograph is done on a big stone within the necessary 2 weeks before the run of the play. And on January 1st, 1895, his poster, here's Mucha with a poster of Sarah behind him. In 1895, on January 1st, his poster for her play, Gismonde by Victorine Sardou, was pasted up all over Paris. I mean, they were everywhere. In fact, an ordinance came out that these posters, ultimately not of Sarah, but later on, were making people dizzy, and they began to limit the amount of posters that people were allowed to paste in Paris. But this poster for Gismonde was radically different from anything that had come before it. It presented a nearly life-size Sarah, very tall, so she was 5'3", so it was probably about 5 feet. And and her face, when they posted it, was seen at eye level. And she was idealized in this finely drawn image that is bathed in these beautiful colors. And these posters were done over and over in different color programs. And the image, let me just go back to Gismonde a second. The image presented Sarah, and it thrilled her. She just loved what Mucha had done for her, and she had never seen his work before. And so each one of his posters of Sarah is astonishingly free and beautiful. And he would always make extensive preparatory studies. He even took photographs first and then drew afterwards. And I'm going to show you some of that. And even their collaboration had him designing a costume that she wore in the play Hamlet. Mucha's work electrified French society, and it brought him instant fame. And by 1890s, these are all of Sarah. By the 1890s, this type of oversized posters became the norm in Paris. And we know that Toulouse-Lautrec was making tons of them. Bonnard did, Viard, many artists were moving into this medium. And so Sarah was so thrilled with Mucha's work that she entered into a 6-year contract with him. She only wanted him to do her posters. And his Art Nouveau style was immediately identified and began to be called Le Style Mucha, the style Mucha. This is my favorite, Lady of the Camellias, with all these stars, absolutely beautiful. And as you go to many of these art exhibitions, you will see them. They are very expensive, about 14,000 and more. But if I had that money, I would buy one. I just love them. And so this style Mucha quickly became a hallmark of French decorative art and an influence on symbolist painters and knobby painters. Mucha's best works were marvels of composition. This is Sarah, this one isn't. Job were cigarettes. And look at this. This is so typical of the line of beauty or Art Nouveau, all these curvilinear shapes. and so his women were wrapped in extravagant robes. Their jewelry echoed Byzantium, Gothic, Judaic, and Czech imagery, all of which he wove into the backgrounds. Okay, so this is what he did. He would take a photograph. Now, this model is certainly not a great beauty, but then he would change the face, and his photographs were not very high quality printing. He just wanted the design. From that, he would do a drawing, and ultimately he would make a painting and add all these design elements to it. They are just beautiful. They're not all of Sarah. He did many, many different posters for biscuits, for wine, for coffee, for cigarettes. And so let's look at some more. Okay, here's another one. And he would change the pose. For instance, you can see this arm is triangular. He brought it more in front of the face. He had the face looking directly at you. Then he added things. He truly was a great designer. Here's one of Sarah, definitely, La Plume, an absolutely beautiful photograph of Sarah that came from Nader, of course. And here is the signs of the zodiac and this wonderful poster that he did. Perhaps the headdress was designed by Rene Lalique. Absolutely stunning. This is another one of Sarah. They are just beyond comparison. Sarah, okay. Sarah's taste in furnishing clothing were as flamboyant as her acting. In her home, she had this framed mirror. It's a life-size standing mirror. It had metallic finials on it and rosettes that bore her motto, which she used all the time, quand mem, which means no matter what, against all odds, through it all. She had an indigo velvet belt with her name emblazoned in bold capital letters. I couldn't find it. There was a wonderful show of Sarah Bernhardt at the Jewish Museum in New York, and the belt was there, but I couldn't get a picture of it. Okay, and she had this belt, and she wore it all the time with her name on it, particularly in the plays of Theodora and Cleopatra. And so you can sort of see what she's wearing here. In this costume of Cleopatra, she doesn't have a belt on. And her clothing that she wore was among the richest and most lavishly bejeweled in the fin de siècle. She just loved to be the center of attention. So these sumptuous accessories that were made for her include a double eagle crown studded with real amethysts, opals, and turquoise that she wore when she performed Theodora. This was made by Lalique. And Rene Lalique, handsome, isn't he? Rene Lalique was known for his creations in glass, in art, in other things. This looks like a necklace, and many of them he made specifically for Sarah. And he made perfume bottles. Isn't this beautiful? Perfume bottles were very popular. You don't see them too much today, except in antique stores, but a lot of women transferred their fragrances to these beautiful bottles. And when they put their perfume on, using something like this made them feel even more special. He did vases. Here's a vase that he did, beautiful. This looks like a pin, or it could be a medallion around the neck. Here we have a beautiful woman and a man kissing her in this magnificent enameled and gold piece. He made clocks. I couldn't find any automobile hood ornaments that so many cars had at that time. And he also worked as a freelance artist. I I this I love this one. I love snow. And so look at this. It's absolutely extraordinary. This is a pendant, and he worked as a freelance artist. He designed pieces of jewelry, not just for himself and for Sarah, but for Cartier, for Boucheron, and many other of the finer jewelry stores. In 1885, Lalique opened his own business where he designed and made jewelry and other glass pieces. And after 1895, he created pieces for Samuel Bing's Paris shop, where Art Nouveau got its title. It's called Maison de l'Art Nouveau, which gave Art Nouveau its name. And one of Lalique's major patrons was Calouste Goldbergian. He was a man who lived in Lisbon. He now has a Goldbergian museum that is filled. He was probably the greatest patron of Lalique. It's filled with Lalique. It's filled with paintings. It's quite magnificent. Um, and so one of Lalique and pictures of Sarah, of course, and many things that he made for Sarah are in the Gulbenkian Museum in Lisbon, Portugal. And her unique style made Sarah a trendsetter, both on the stage and off the stage. Not only did she capitalize in her form-fitting costumes, which accentuated her lovely, svelte, willowy figure, but she carefully chose the fabrics that she wanted them made in. And she would embellish them with corsages, ruffles, boas, fur. Her personal wardrobe, these are things she might have worn on the stage, and then she kept them. They were made for her, and she would wear them privately as well. Her personal wardrobe was equally extravagant. In winter, she could be seen wearing her chinchilla coat, and between seasons, and she always wore this, she wore a spectacular high-collared ermine capelet or, or capelet. Uh, I don't know that I would wear this, but she loved it. Okay, I love the little tails, right? During the 1870s, one of Sarah's friends from the community of artists was the portraitist George Claranin. He did a large scale painting of Sarah, which I will show you in a minute. This is Claranin in his studio. You can see he worked very large. He also, I love the way artists dressed for their studios. He did this large scale painting of Sarah, probably the most famous painting of her, in white satin, lounging on her sofa. There's a wolf hound at her feet, her favorite dog, and it was Claranin who most likely introduced Rene Lalique to Sarah Bernhardt in the mid 1890s. And then Lalique began designing for her spectacular jewelry that she wore on and off the stage. And his flair for the dramatic, as well as hers, influenced his creative design. So here is a headdress that she wore, real pearl, everything was real. Diamonds were real, rubies. Can you imagine the cost of these things? Sarah had become Lalique's muse, and he designed some of his finest pieces for her. He was fascinated by her eccentricity, and he included, not in these pieces, but in many of them, eccentric, exotic animals, which echoed the beauty of the natural world. And she just loved living creatures. And he incorporated gold flora and fauna as you can see here, flowers that are beautiful, and this crown, I don't know if they're rubies or what they are. And he incorporated gold flora and fauna decorated with precious stones. She loved pearls, and he used enameling techniques like cloisonne in many of his creations that reflected seasonal atmosphere. Opals became water in his designs. Diamonds reflected the undersides of the leaves, and insects were designed to roam on her hats, and her hair was held by large pins and combs that might have had creatures on them. Lalique's creations for the Divine Sarah rejected many of the looks that were popular for high society ladies. She was far more over the top and extravagant. It's believed that Sarah Bernhardt introduced Lalique to the museum collector Calouste Gulbenkian of Portugal. And his enthusiasm, Gulbenkian's enthusiasm for the talents of Lalique became the chance of a lifetime for Lalique. Gulbenkian commissioned over 145 jeweled objects from him, and he became Lalique's major patron from the years 1895 to 1912. And once Lalique was free of financial concern and coupled with this marvelous inspiration that he had of design, he was free to design at will. And Lalique then entered the most creative period of his jewelry career. Now he did this head of Sarah with these ivory, it's drama and comedy on either side on these ivory chiseled pieces. This, I don't know what this is. I would imagine it's a medallion. Here she is looking a lot like Shirley MacLaine, don't you think? I think she looks just like her. Okay, and so Gulbenkian's museum collection, and we're looking at some of the pieces, his stand as the biggest treasure trove of Lalique's art. And if you go there, and I hope that I will be going there in October, I'm supposed to, if COVID holds off. These are some of the glorious pieces that he designed for her. Real diamonds, real jade, real emeralds, everything. This is cloisonne over here, if I can use this. This is cloisonne, which is melted glass that fills the forms that are made out of metal or sterling. All right, this is a belt buckle that Lalique made for Sarah. These are some pieces that he made for her, and I don't know if they were gifts. I wouldn't be surprised if they were, or if she paid for them. Okay, this she wore in Cleopatra. Cleopatra, it was said, had 2 Baroque pearls. Each one was so big and so valuable that they would have bought her a villa in Tuscany. This is a ring that he designed for Sarah. And so here again is the sculpture and the hat. Amazing things. Okay, again, bronze, ivory, enamel, and metal. These are in the Gulbenkian museums that were commissioned by him. This is a teapot, absolutely fascinating. Look at the serpents on it, and probably something that Medusa had nightmares about. And this is a bracelet. Sarah had a relationship. I don't know what that means, but she had a relationship. Knowing Sarah, she probably had an affair with him, with Gustave Doré, the renowned artist and book illustrator of Dante, Cervantes, and Poe. And he gave her advice because he was a wonderful artist, and she was always interested in becoming one herself. He gave her advice on sculpting, and together they produced statues for a new casino that was in Monte Carlo that was designed by Charles Garnier, who had just finished Paris's magnificent new opera house. And I wanted to show you the opera house, which is so fascinating, and you can take a tour and see the glorious interior. So one can only imagine what his casinos were like in Monte Carlo. And she also took sculpture lessons with Matho Musnier, who was a rather academic sculptor, but he spent a great deal of time helping her. And some of her sculptures were inspired by her acting work. These are pieces that Sarah actually made, but I hesitate to say this, but she was so busy with the theater. I'm sure that maybe some of her teachers had a little bit of a hand in the final project. I'm not sure, so I don't want her to be angry at me. Okay, and so here are her things, and this is a very famous portrait of her working on a wonderful statue. Okay, um, this piece was inspired by her performance in a play called La Sphinx, and it's a self-portrait on a decorative bronze inkwell of 1890. And so here we have Sarah. She designed this apparently, and this is the death of Ophelia, and it's probably her best work. It's a magnificent piece. And it's estimated that during her lifetime, she sculpted at least 50 different pieces, 25 of which are still in existence. But the tour de force of Sarah's career had to be her 9 visits to the United States. They began in 1889 when she was 36 and ended in 1918 when she was 74. So she made 9 separate visits to America. In America, she was the subject of fanatical interest. Even before she came on October 27th, 1880, she opened her tour with a play titled Andrienne Lecouvreur, and it triumphed. And then in the agonized death scene, and let me tell you, she loved to die on stage. The audience burst into an enormous ovation. And she also performed Camille Phaedra, Lady of the Camellias, which is a play. Lady of the Camellias is a play about an infamous courtesan. American critics expected Sarah to be an overpainted French seductress of supposed wickedness, but instead they found her to be a slender, elegant young woman with a ravishing voice and a personal naturalism, which they found extremely moving. She was both admired and condemned by viewers and critics alike. And the stores in which she shopped, and she liked to shop, really cashed in on her name, Sarah Bernhardt. Shopped here, she bought this. It really made a lot of money for these proprietors. In the 7 months of her first American tour, Sarah appeared in about 50 different plays in cities that range from New York City to Kansas. And when she boarded her ship to return to France, she was tired, but she was extremely rich, very, very rich. She made a fortune in America. And there would be 8 more American tours, the last being during World War I when Sarah was 74 years old. Her tours, for the most part, were sensational successes. She had morphed from being this scandalous figure to being regarded as a glorious and magnificent actress who was idealized as a great symbol and possibly a terrific ambassador for France. During her Russian tour, she became enamored with a Greek man who was outside of the world of theater. His name was Aristides Damala. And she decided, just at looking at him, that he was a born actor, and she was determined to perform with him. But the greatest mistake of Sarah's life was marrying Damala. And God knows why she did it. She had so many other opportunities, and she married this, let's say, creep. And he squandered her money. He gambled. He was an obsessive womanizer, but most of all, he really didn't like being called Mr. Bernhardt. He flaunted his mistresses in Sarah's face. He insulted her publicly in restaurants, in the theater, and despite all this, she stayed with him. Eventually, though, she'd had enough, and she threw him out. But he came back, and she took him back. I love his hairstyle, and he further embarrassed her. His debilitating drug habit, he was heavily addicted to morphine, brought on his early death at 34. And let's applaud that she was finally rid of Aristides Damala. Only one time in their almost 60-year relationship was there a serious breach between Sarah and her beloved son, Maurice. Maurice had married, he had children, but the event which also shattered the unity in France was the Dreyfus affair. Maurice was a right-wing snob whom she had raised as if he was part of the aristocracy. She spared no money on him. He dressed elegantly. He went to the finest schools, and he became this terrible snob. And Sarah, who was, even though she had been baptized as a Catholic, was always proud of her Jewish heritage. She was a passionate supporter of Emile Zola, who came out strongly for Dreyfus' innocence, and a passionate supporter of Dreyfus. She believed he was innocent as well. And she was now a sincere but practicing Catholic. But she forgot that she never forgot that she was originally a Jew. And for decades, some people in France, in Canada, in Russia, in Germany, hatefully caricatured, even persecuted her for her Jewish cupidity, which means that they said she was greedy with money, with possessions, she was weak, she was nouveau riche, and there was virulent anti-Semitism that broke out in France during the Dreyfus affair, and Jews were called despicable names. Although Sarah was supported by many distinguished Jewish people, including Zola, who wrote J'accuse, Sarah was thought of as a traitor to France. Despite her patriotism, which was really unimpeachable, and her feeling that she was French to the core, and everybody knew this about her, she and Maurice endured this terrible family crisis. And it was ultimately repaired when Dreyfus in 1905 was exonerated. It was just a horrible time for Sarah as well as for Dreyfus. And from the time of Sarah's early successes, she lived splendidly in decorated homes where she surrounded herself with ornaments and exotica of the high Victorian period. Walls were covered with paintings, mainly of herself, sculptures that she made, and we saw her sculpting early on, velvet tapestries, immense vases, and souvenirs of her travels. And she had an enormous staff consisting of maids, butlers, secretaries, coachmen, gardeners, and she had a menagerie of pets that changed constantly, including at least a dozen dogs. In August of 1894, when she was exhausted, here she is, she was really tired, and she visited a small island on the Atlantic coast of Brittany called Belle Isle, and she purchased this abandoned fort that was surrounded by a small amount of land, maybe an acre or two. And over the years, her holdings increased. She added more and more land. She had a view of the sea, and she added a manor house for herself called Penhoet, which had been a hotel of, and she had a farm. She raised chickens. She just relaxed. She milked cows, and there were sheep. She grew produce there, her salads. She had elegant bungalows built for her loved ones, including George Claranin, the painter that she liked so much, and another woman, a sculptor named Louise Abama, and her son Maurice. She built him a beautiful villa there for Maurice and his wife and children. Sarah was most joyous and relaxed in this location on Belle Isle. Each morning, she would take a canoe and she would paddle on the Atlantic, or she'd walk along the seashore and go shrimping. And then she might have an extravagant picnic there, followed by a siesta. And her afternoons often included playing tennis or even fishing. So she really had a different life in Belle Isle. In stark contrast to her pleasures there, her health was declining. And years before, when she had been traveling somewhere, she had a bad fall on the deck of a ship and badly injured her knee. She refused to let the ship doctor treat her, and the damage was aggravated when, in the final act of Tosca, she threw herself from the parapet of the San Angelo prison, and they had neglected to put a mattress on the other side of the the set to break her fall, and so she fell again on this bad leg. From that time on, she lived with agonizing pain, and finally she could take it no more, and she decided to have her leg amputated. The operation was partially covered by the Rothschilds, who were friends of her, and it took place in Bordeaux. And she tried to use that wooden leg, but eventually she had this white sedan chair created, and she was carried around for the rest of her life by porters who carried her in this chair. So she always looked beautiful. Much has been written about the rivalry she had with the wonderful Italian actress named Eleanor Duse, and it occurred in the later part of Sarah's career. And we might think about the two of them as the dueling divas. Eleonora Duse had admired Sarah since she was first deciding to become an actress. And the two women had a lot in common. They both came from broken homes. They both supplemented their incomes and funded their respective projects by working as courtesans each keeping and sometimes sharing wealthy lovers to provide the necessary cash. And they also both had talented lovers to write plays for them. So George Bernard Shaw wrote this for Sarah. He wrote this critique of Sarah, and you can tell he didn't like her very much. He wrote, Madame Bernhardt has elected to go around the world pretending to kill people with hatchets and hairpins and making, I presume, heaps of money. I wish her every success, but I shall certainly not treat her as a dramatic actress of the first rank unless she pays me well for it. Pretty nasty, isn't it? Um, Another critic wrote, Stark Young was the critic, and she wrote, her physical equipment, most of all, her immortal voice, was extraordinary, but limited to possibilities in style. Bernhardt had an undiluted egotism that very often swamped the play. In other words, she overacted, and the other actors, and everything else save the audience's response to herself. To all her art, it was a passion of self, a splendor of an artist's mood, though to her, art was the only important thing in the world. Sarah and Doucet each toured the world numerous times. Usually they would follow each other a year or two behind, playing the same roles, but with vastly different styles. Doucet was called the first modern actor in the revolution to take place in the theater at the end of the 19th century. She was kind of laid back, easygoing, while Sarah was exotic, both on and off the stage, while her nemesis, Doucet's acting was much more natural and modern. And it's been said that Doucet's acting revolutionized the theater. She was a classicist, and Sarah belonged to the more dramatic, romantic movement. Some months after World War I broke out, George Clemenceau, who was not yet Premier of France, learned that Sarah was on the list of potential hostages that had been drawn up by the Germans in anticipation of capturing Paris. When Sarah felt that she was no longer in danger, so he helped her get out of Paris and they hid her. When she felt she was no longer in danger, she returned to Paris to perform for the men at the front. In the autumn of 1915, Sarah, who was now in her 70s, set out to entertain the troops. She was always a patriot, always interested in helping the young men who were saving her country. Accompanied by another actress, they performed in open marketplaces, in squares, to groups of about 3,000 soldiers, many of them who were wounded in mess tents. And they performed in the mess tents, on the terrace of deserted chateaus, in hospitals, and at the end of every show, there was the singing of the Marseillaise with all the soldiers who could stand in the audience cheering loudly. In the fall of 1916, Sarah embarked on her ninth and final tour to the United States, but illness brought her back to France and to her son Maurice, who desperately missed her. Her name remains the paradigm for great actress, the way the name of Pavlova does for ballerina, or Einstein for genius. And today, Sarah Bernhardt is still the most famous French personality after Joan of Arc. Rene Lalique designed this dragonfly corsage for Sarah Bernhardt. This incredible piece of jewelry encompasses both the female form and a reference to nature. It's about 9 inches tall. You would wear it on your shoulder, on your back, wherever you wanted to wear it, on a big hat. And this incredible piece of jewelry encompasses the female form and nature and the mystical. And the wings are movable, and they're fastened by delicate hinges that move gently on the garment to which it's attached. So it is an icon of duality, like Sarah Bernhardt herself, the perfect and the exquisite fusion of humanity and nature.